Hey, I'm Thomas Mahler. I'm the creative director at Moon Studios.
Hey, I'm Gennady, and I'm a production and technical director, and both of us are the founders of Moon.
We are working on a new project which is called No Rest for the Wicked.
It's the biggest thing we've ever tried to achieve. It's the most ambitious one. It's something we've been working up to since 2016. We're full steam ahead, making sure we're ready for early access launch, and also going to be working a lot on this game for many, many years to come. I think the most difficult thing that people cannot yet appreciate, but hopefully after we launch in early access, we will be able to do this update, is the multiplayer aspect of it. Because Ori was completely built in a single player way, and there's a lot you can get away with when you're building a game for single player. But once you have to design a game, both from technical angle and also from a creative angle, for PvP and PvE from the ground up, it changes everything. Basically because every single encounter, every single setup, every single implementation, every single mechanic, even the most simple physics, all of that needs to work over networking. The difficult thing with building a game that is trying to achieve so many different things in so many different aspects, it's never just one thing. It is achieving all of those things in one product. It's never, okay, this is the one thing that's hard. It's like, okay, if you do A and B and C and D and you have one code base and one creative approach that has to hit all of those goals all at once, it makes it that much harder. So I would say the challenge is to just try to integrate all of these elements in a successful way.
Yeah, I think the same is true on the design side, right? So if we would have just said, oh, let's do a top-down Dark Souls and call it a day, right? Like life would have been much easier. But we had all these crazy ambitions, right? Hey, we also want housing and farming, some of these survival aspects in there. And by the way, then we want special attacks on top and all of this, right? And making that all work and making that recipe work together, like that's always the difficult thing. Even though we have a combat system that is kind of a little bit inspired by Souls, of course, most of the other stuff is not very Souls-like at all, right? We don't take away your XP when you die. Enemies don't respawn on death and so on, right? And then we have the whole RNG system. Everything is like, in many ways, No Rest for the Wicked is so much closer to an ARPG than it is to a typical Souls game, right? People now see top-down Souls because the moment you see an animation combat system, people love putting things into boxes, right? Into categories, and just say, well, top-down Souls, there you go, right? But that's another really interesting thing, how well the RNG stuff works out, right? That people get really excited, like even on multiple playthroughs, right? I don't know if I would be excited playing the first 30 minutes of a Souls game again and again, because ultimately what happens in those games is that, well, you get the same stuff, right? That chest in that particular part of the world will always contain that item, right? We want to do something completely different where we give the player ultimate control over their character. It should be super precise, right? So that you can do things like, oh, if an enemy swings his sword, right, I can jump back. I can precisely time that so that he misses me by 1 pixel. That's why we changed the controls and everything.
It's a very intuitive thing for us as well of just, I don't think we would want it any other way, especially with all the verticality that we have in the game, jumping and climbing, and it's a very different level design compared to just any other action RPG, and it's much more Metroidvania. It's much more of creating these shortcuts, creating these interconnected moments, having something that you can really get lost in a good way. And with the point-and-click model, how do you really make that natural? How do you make that convenient? I think it would be very, very difficult, and it just doesn't fit our DNA.
Our combat system is very similar to how a Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat and so on would work, meaning that we have a timeline. We actually figure out, hey, what are the actions that we want to perform, right? And then we tell our animators, hey, make me an animation that does this. And then we have to chop it all up, right? And kind of like understand, hey, on this frame, this has to happen. Then on this frame, this has to happen. Then on this frame, this has to happen, right? And we have hundreds, if not thousands of moves and so on in the game. So that's extremely laborious, but you need that kind of precision if you want to pull off this kind of combat, right? The animations really have to matter. You have to let the animation basically drive everything. Hopefully, I think the players will absolutely love that we went through this crazy thing of making sure every weapon is unique.
The combat is a lot more advanced, a lot more tactical. Every single move is a lot more meaningful, and there is a really beautiful skill progression that the player can feel. It's not just the character progression and loot progression, RPG progression, and upgrading the weapons, getting better stats with weapons, getting better stats for your character, getting better stats for your town, because the town building aspect in this game is basically your own extra character that you can progress. But it's really about also feeling that your skill is improving and getting that very, very nice kick of satisfaction of knowing that, oh, now I know how to walk around this boss, and I've figured out that I can actually just run to the side instead of having to roll all the time or spam the rolls, or I can find these openings a lot better, or I understand how I can use the additional combos coming out of a roll or coming out of the roll attack, or using these specials. And all of that creates this depth where you're maxing out the game not only on the numbers level, which is what ARPGs are really good at, but it's also creating an addictive loop on a mechanics level and maxing out that progression of I am a badass, I'm getting better at this game, I'm learning and I'm improving. And I think that is a very addictive combination. We start with explaining the base mechanics, the combat, the exploration, the RNG systems, the crafting, the town, the end game. Really giving people a lot of fun hours with this game, even in early access day one. So even though we're holding back certain things, I think people can expect, and now that we've seen how people even played this very, very small opening stretch, what we hope to see is a lot of different builds that people try, a lot of realms, a lot of characters that they start with, and a lot of fun from the game. Even in the early state that it's in, I think we would like to think that this is going to be a very polished early access. We always like to polish things. We're doing our best, obviously, to optimize and minimize the number of bugs. It is a very complex product, but I think we're feeling pretty good about the quality that we will be able to deliver. And from there, we branch out to multiplayer. So now that we've established what this game is at its core and its mechanics, and we've built a really good single-player foundation that people love, all right, now let's take the next step. Now let's bring in your friends. No Rest for the Wicked is coming to early access on Steam on April 18th.